Thank you so very much, and apologies for that. And also apologies for not being on video. Unfortunately, I had a last-minute travel emergency, so I'm not in my usual office at the moment. But as long as you can hear me and you can see the slides that I'm presenting, then that should be more than sufficient, I hope. Thank you very much, Ron, for putting this together, and thank you very much to the attendees for being here and giving us your time and attention. My name is Mamoon Chowdry, and I'm a solution architect at Amazon Web Services. Honestly, sharing my time and sharing the knowledge and experience that I have with customers like yourselves is the most favorite part of my job. It's an absolute delight to do things like this, and so it's my pleasure, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. With that being said, I would like to spend the remainder of my time here talking about how you can automate the majority of security challenges that we commonly see across enterprises that have either yet to move to the cloud or are just beginning to start their cloud adoption. I'm going to spend some time talking about the automation that is available to you to address some of the most common security challenges that we see. This is a really, really important topic for those of you that are security leaders or security practitioners. In the last 2 years, we've seen security incidents go up by approximately 50% across the industry. So whether you use the cloud or don't use the cloud, security incidents across IT organizations have increased dramatically. And why there's a number of reasons for this. This has a real impact on security practitioners like yourself. We see security leaders typically spend about another extra hours a week working more than their colleagues. 1 in 10 work up to a full day extra a week. And so it's a phenomenal challenge. And when we kind of dig deep into this, there's a number of reasons why that happens. So I'd like to talk about some of the common challenges that we see. I'd like to share with you some of the ways in which you can solve for 80%, roughly, 80% of the common challenges that we see, and how you can build a cloud security baseline using automation to address the most common problems that affect IT organizations. And at the end, I'll share with you a call to action. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. And this slide, I think, should be fairly self-explanatory for most security practitioners. I hope that a few of these may sound familiar to you. We commonly see within medium and large enterprises, and even some small enterprises as well, some common challenges. One, their IT infrastructure is always changing. They very often have many different teams of developers that are building applications. They're innovating on behalf of their own customers, and they're building new kinds of applications, new kinds of technologies into their application stacks. They're processing increasing amounts of data, and that data is bi-directional. And they're increasingly, with the advent of the cloud, you can increasingly expand your footprint and go global in minutes. And so that represents its own security challenge as well. And we see organizations very quickly having to adopt different security postures, different compliance needs to be able to support different types of regulatory regimes and so forth. And this is really, really hard for enterprises to do within their own data centers. If you're an IT security professional or a member of a compliance team, you may have developers that are building a 3-tier web application, for example, on the left, or maybe a serverless web application on the right. How do you secure these workloads? Do you build different security stacks for each one of these? Do you have different tools and different processes for these kinds of workloads? Do you limit what your developers can build? Do you say, well, okay, here's a standard set of application technologies that you can use, and it doesn't matter if you want to use the next best thing, you're restricted to this because this is all we know we can secure. This is a really hard problem for a lot of enterprises that I come across. Can you build a baseline for all of those different types of applications that your developers may build? You could, but that is a really, really hard job to do. When it comes to kind of baselining your security stack and your tools and processes, there are 4 things that we think you should really be thinking about. One is, can you easily identify your assets and your compliance requirements. Can you then, with that understanding, protect your assets and their data? Can you then be proactive? Can you detect threats and vulnerabilities that maybe your application developers didn't know about, or maybe your IT operations team aren't yet aware of? Do you have an easy way to be able to do that? And finally, can you monitor the effectiveness of all of these? Can you dashboard these things? Can you collect the appropriate metrics to validate that you have the right controls in place, both from a security perspective and a compliance perspective? For a lot of organizations that I come across, as they kind of begin their cloud adoption from their own kind of physical premises, the answers that I hear are that it's very difficult to do all of these well. And so with that in mind, I'd like to share with you some capabilities that we offer our customers. We have a very broad security stack that covers not just hybrid network environments and IoT and cloud-based workloads, but this is a subset of that security stack here. And I'd like to share with you some of the capabilities that this stack offers our customers. And I would like to, as we walk through this, I'd like you to ask yourselves, where do you think you stand within the capabilities that I'm describing? Do you think you have that area covered? Do you think it's a potential gap for you? And if so, how do you think you may be able to close that gap? And so as I walk through these, I would like you to kind of ask yourselves those questions. So the very first one that I'd like to talk about is AWS Organizations. This is a service that our customers can use. It's a free service, and it gives you a number of things. It gives you consolidated billing across all of the accounts in your AWS environment. But just as importantly, if not more importantly, it allows you to govern everything you do in the cloud from a single place across all accounts. So you can create what we call service control policies to allow or deny certain actions or things or physical locations across your entire organization. For example, you can block your developers and your IT operations team from disabling parts of your security stack or disabling parts of your guardrails. Similarly, you can deploy guardrails across your entire organization without exception. And that is a really, really powerful capability. Can you do that? Can you do that today? A lot of customers will tell us, well, no, they can't do that. But there is a capability here that if you're in the AWS cloud, that across what we call organizational units, essentially groups of AWS accounts, you may have regional units, you may have operations in EMEA, and you may have a security team in Brazil, and you may have developers in Japan. Wherever your organization is on the planet, you should be able to apply the same guardrails consistently across them. When I say guardrails, what do I mean? Well, we offer 62 guardrails out of the box with AWS Organization. 22 are mandatory. These are just general good practices. Others are either strongly recommended, mandatory, or elective. And here's some examples here. Now, you can extend these with your own guardrails as well. But these are guardrails that are always working for you, 7x24. So you get an awful lot of benefit out of that. They're managed by AWS, so you don't necessarily have to manage them. You just select them, configure them, and enable them, and that's it. So it's a great way to prevent accidental or malicious security risks across your entire organization. Some of the key guardrails that we think are important are being able to prevent people granting themselves root access to an account and sharing those keys. You might, as an organization, may decide that that's really something that you want to be able to do. That's a best practice. You may want to say we want to block all of our data from being accessed by the public internet. You could do that too. Once you've done that, how can you track and record all of your infrastructure is behaving as it should? Well, we have a capability for that called AWS Config. It's an agentless service that tracks configuration changes across your entire infrastructure. Can think of it as a configuration management database of sorts that's operating in real time across your entire cloud environment. And it supports what we call multiple conformance packs. And these are essentially groups of compliance policies. So we support NIST 853, for example, CIS and FedRAMP. And all you have to do is switch it on and enable it. You can do it through organizations and enable it across your entire organization. So if, for example, an auditor said to you, can you show me that your credit card processing application was PCI compliant last Tuesday? Well, if I was in my own data center and I had to manually kind of log into all of these machines and look at access logs and firewall rules and so forth, that would be really hard to do. AWS Config will probably tell you that in about 30 seconds. And so this is a really, really important capability for our customers because it allows them not only to just track the changes in their infrastructure, but also provide automated actions, which is what you see on the right-hand side. To give you an example, a customer of mine has a rule that says anytime we detect a critical application being opened to the public internet unexpectedly, automatically shut it down. It doesn't matter if it's business critical. As soon as we detect that something has a path to the public internet, automatically shut it down, compartmentalize it. We'll run some forensics later. And that's something that's running 7/24 through AWS Config. Now I'll ask you, is that a capability that you have today? Should it be a capability that you need, that you use today? AWS Config is designed to do exactly that. Very often, customers are faced with trying to understand where is their data and where is their most sensitive data. Does any of the data that we are hosting in a, maybe a public share, we may be hosting white papers, but is there any sensitive data that may have accidentally been contaminated there? Are there any social security numbers? Are there any other types of PII data? Well, Amazon Macie is a service that is constantly running to detect and discover sensitive data that you have across your entire cloud environment. So it understands your security posture for your S3 buckets, which is where our customers primarily store their data and build their data lakes. It integrates with AWS Organizations so that you can, across your entire organization, visualize where your sensitive data is, how it's being accessed, and indeed automate any risks that are identified when it discovers sensitive data as well. So it builds an organizational-wide inventory of your data for you. So this is an example of one of the things it does. It goes across all of your buckets where you store data and tells you which ones are public and which ones are encrypted or not encrypted and so forth. All of the findings can be used to trigger automatic remediation. And indeed, that's a capability that stretches across the security services that we offer our customers. Or the findings you can review in a dashboard and remediate them manually, but you also have the opportunity to automate the remediation as well. So you're not getting paged at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Rather, you can configure the cloud to act on your behalf if a certain risk is identified. And one of the ways to do that is through Security Hub. Security Hub is a way of continuously aggregating findings from a whole host of different security services that you have available to you. It doesn't have to be necessarily AWS services. There's a whole lot of third-party ISVs that have security tools that are available on our marketplace. There are many tens of thousands of those. And you can also ingest findings from there. And that means that you can now begin to do automated security checks. So for example, can I check that my entire organization is compliant with CIS best practices? Or can I check that everything in my production environment for credit card processing is PCI DSS compliant based on all of the findings from all of the services I have available to me? Security Hub will do that for you, and it will do that on an automated basis. I will ask you, across your security stack and across your security tooling, do you have a similar capability? Is this something that would be valuable to you? We have many customers that are using this today. In Security Hub, there are a number of security standards that we support. I think one of the most valuable to customers is the Foundational Security Best Practices, or FSBP. This is about 223, it's right there, controls that we've established through our experience being one of the first cloud providers to offer a cloud offering publicly. From the many customers that we have, large, small, medium enterprises, government organizations, and so forth, what are the best practices that we've distilled from that experience, putting that into those foundational best practices, and then making that available to all of our customers. And so with all of these, whether it's CIS or PCI DSS, what Security Hub will do is that it will evaluate all of the findings from all of your security tools, identify deviations. Now, in some cases, deviations are okay, but maybe not. So it flags them for you. And the cool thing is in Security Hub, it also gives you prescriptive guidance as well. So it tells you how can you remediate a particular finding. And so it's really valuable for our customers when they want to be able to understand how to remediate potential risks that are identified. And so if you're an IT security practitioner, you would use Security Hub to configure the security standards that you want to use across your entire organization. A compliance team, their job will simply be to use Security Hub to review the appropriate security standards and verify the configuration in line with those standards. And for your developers, it will be for them to address the findings that you identify through Security Hub on an automated basis. And so this is a really comprehensive way of addressing security at scale across your entire infrastructure. Now, I mentioned one of the other things that we encourage people to think about is protecting their infrastructure and data beyond kind of identifying their assets and identifying potential risks. And so there are a number of capabilities that I would like to walk you through in this regard. AWS Firewall Manager enforces network security rules across your entire infrastructure using consistent and hierarchical rules. You could define your own rules, but there's a whole library of managed rules that we build for you that you can deploy across your infrastructure. So think of web application firewall rules for your public applications. Think of security rules to define which internal applications can communicate with each other, rules for load balancers, rules for your public network, even DNS firewall rules as well. This, by the way, is actually really important. We're constantly using our own threat intelligence for identifying potentially malicious traffic. For example, ransomware C2, command and control, right? You can actually block that by deploying a single managed rule from AWS in your DNS firewall in AWS. Once you enable that, all of the ransomware command and control, for example, that we detect will be automatically blocked from your infrastructure. So even if you do have a part of your infrastructure that's compromised by ransomware, it won't be able to phone home simply by deploying this managed service. And again, because it's integrated with organizations, you can do it across your entire organizational footprint. And again, you'll see you'll see some commonalities here. It's for the security team here to build the policies for Firewall Manager or select the policies for Firewall Manager. The compliance teams will simply have to review and approve and verify the configuration of what's deployed. And then the developer can just use and reuse policies for their own applications. So you'll see a trend here as we walk through these. The kind of scope of responsibilities begins to reduce from building everything from the ground up to simply kind of configuring, deploying, and monitoring findings that are detected through automation. So when I talk about building a cloud security baseline and solving for 80% of your common security challenges, this is what I would ask you to think about. Don't build your security from the ground up. Build things that you can configure and deploy and focus on addressing those findings. And if you could focus on addressing those findings in an automated manner so you don't get that page at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, even better. Now let's talk about encryption. You may have heard the phrase "dance like nobody's watching." Our CTO says, encrypt like everybody can access your data. Assume that by default. It's a very uncomfortable assumption, but it's a best practice for us. In this case, I'd like to kind of focus on data at rest. For data at rest, we have a key management service. These are hardware-based HSMs. They support FIPS 140-3. They're integrated with about 90 different services. And essentially, this is key management infrastructure that allows your developers to consume encryption keys at scale. And it allows you as a security practitioner to manage policies around who can access those keys, who can use those keys for encryption, who can use those keys for decryption, and it allows you to audit and track all of those keys. I've had one customer that actually used this to encrypt every single customer record with its own encryption key. So if a single key was ever compromised somehow, it limited the blast radius. So you can create millions, if not billions, of keys at scale using KMS. We see this being used across the board for protecting data across an organization. And again, it's integrated with organizations, so you can do this across the board and have a very clear, well-defined key management service for all of your critical data. So again, the same themes apply. Your security team will simply manage the key access policies. You may have a key that's used for encrypting a particular type of data, and a certain application can only be allowed to encrypt it, and a certain application can only be allowed to decrypt using that key. So it's a great way of kind of separating roles and responsibilities out. The compliance team, again, their scope of responsibility can focus now on just configuring and verifying that access there. And then the developer simply consumes those keys at scale through an API. Now, when we think about the needs of developers, one of the most common security issues that we see is simply developers hard coding secrets into their application code. And that can be a really innocent mistake to make for developers. So it is something that we see for customers that haven't yet put controls in place to deal with that. We have a service called Secrets Manager. Secrets Manager is an API-based service where you can store any kind of secret and make it available to an application. It could be a username, password. It could be API keys. It could be OAuth tokens. It can manage the storage of them, the rotation of those keys, and it stops the developers having to handle those secrets directly. They simply invoke an API, an authenticated API, to pull those secrets in either at launch or at runtime. And you as a security professional, you define who can access those secrets, what are the rules for secret rotation, and you can also audit and control access to them. So I would ask you, do you have a capability like this across your organization? If not, how can you close that? How can you close that gap? Now on to detecting threats and vulnerabilities. And there's two key services here that our customers use consistently. For the first is Amazon GuardDuty. Think of Amazon GuardDuty as automated threat detection. You could conceivably have, if you don't follow our security best practices, you could conceivably have a compromised compute instance that has malware running on it. Or maybe something's been compromised and somebody's using it for crypto mining. GuardDuty uses threat intelligence to actually detect a lot of the common command and control traffic and traffic patterns associated with risks like that. And it can be enabled in just a few clicks across your entire organization. It ingests data from network activity, IP traffic flow logs, DNS logs, API logs from AWS, data access logs, Kubernetes logs, and so forth. It applies machine learning, anomaly detection, additional threat intelligence from our analysis of the global state of the internet that we're doing constantly in real time. So it will automatically block for you things like malicious IPs, malicious domains. It will detect, escalation of privileges, malicious IP addresses. If it sees that you're normally operating in North America, but suddenly someone launched an instance in Japan, for example, it will identify that as an anomaly, and it can scale to tens of billions of events. So think of this as your personal kind of sentry across your entire organization, across all of your AWS accounts. It simply takes an administrator to set it up in AWS Organizations, and then it's enforced, no ifs, ands, or buts across your entire organization. And again, IT security can simply configure it. They can review and investigate the findings. The compliance team verifies the configuration, and it's up to your developers to address any findings that you identify. Now, when it comes to the actual servers or compute instances themselves, vulnerability management at scale is a really hard problem. And so we launched a few years ago Amazon Inspector. Amazon Inspector gives you centralized visibility and management of your entire compute infrastructure, no matter where it is on the planet, within the cloud, and indeed in hybrid architectures as well. So it does continuous scanning, continuous discovery across your instances. You can begin to identify things like patch vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities. You can enforce compliance. So for example, NIST, CSF, PCI DSS, common vulnerabilities and exceptions. You essentially identify fleets and benchmark standards, and it applies standards to those fleets constantly 7/24. And so it will flag if it finds, for example, an instance that is not PCI DSS compliant, and allow you to define if you want to remediate that manually or on an automated basis as well. And again, it's something that can be done across your entire organization by an IT security practitioner. And the compliance team simply verifies the configuration, and again, it's up to the developer to address those findings. So an incredibly powerful capability. If I was running my own physical data center, I'd have to build something or get a third-party service to kind of install an agent across all of my fleet. And if I've got developers spinning up and shutting down virtual machines all of the time and so forth, suddenly I've got a really, really complex problem on my hand. It may not be a problem if you've got one server or 10 servers, but what happens if you've got tens of thousands of servers? What happens if you've got 100,000 servers? We have some customers that will spin up, 10 to 20,000 servers in a day just to do some ad hoc number crunching or some transient applications. And that becomes a really, really difficult problem to manage unless you have something like Amazon Inspector. For all of these services, you should consider storing the remediations and storing the findings in a centralized place where it can't be tampered. You should store those logs in a centralized place that are immutable. So this is important for forensic analysis, and it's important for compliance auditing and a number of other needs as well. And that's just a general best practice. This is something that's very, very easy to do in AWS. It's simply a configuration checkbox, but it means across your entire organization, if an auditor turns up and says, show me that nobody was able to access some of your critical infrastructure across the public internet, last Wednesday, you've got the logs in a single place to be able to do that, and the analytics capabilities to be able to do that. Finally, Security Hub. Security Hub is where you bring, as I touched on earlier, all of those findings together. So Security Hub allows you to kind of ingest all of the findings from not just the AWS security stack, but indeed a large number of third-party partner solutions as well. So you're not just limited to the security tools that we offer. You can also bring in best-of-class security tools from wherever they are, whether it's AWS or not. We use a standard format for ingesting those findings, and then you can run automated security checks, whether it's at the network level, the compute level, the storage level, to a variety of benchmarks across your organization. And you can begin to either on an automated or a manual manner remediate those findings. And so this is a core component of establishing a common baseline security posture across your organization, no matter what kind of stack, what kind of technologies your application teams are building in your enterprise. And again, same thing again, you'll see the security team, they can now focus on reviewing and investigating findings. The compliance team can now focus on reviewing and tracking how everything is configured and ensuring it fulfills their compliance requirements. And the developers now get a list of findings that they not necessarily have been aware about when they developed or when they started building that application, but now they do, and they have the opportunity to remediate those. And so key takeaways, make sure that you have a way of identifying across your IT infrastructure all of your assets, and you understand what your compliance requirements are. I walk through a number of services that we offer to be able to do that. And the question I ask of you is, do you have good enough answer for this need that we see across IT organizations? If not, what are those gaps and how can you close those gaps? Once you've done that, can you now protect your infrastructure and your critical business data? For many enterprises, data is their most valuable asset. So you've got to protect your data to protect your business. And as I showed you, we have a number of tools to be able to do that. And again, this is just a small part of our overall security stack. But do you think you have an appropriate answer for all of these needs? If not, how can you close those gaps? Then, can you detect proactively threats and vulnerabilities to your organization? Many enterprises operate with infrastructure that's exposed to the public internet by design. That comes with its own inherent risks. And so do you have the appropriate tools to put controls in place to mediate those risks? And then finally, can you monitor the effectiveness of your security practice? Can you evaluate where are the gaps in your security practices, or where are the gaps in your tooling, where are the gaps in your processing, in your processes, and can you easily report on those and present findings and remediation guidance to your application developers and other people within your organization? Well, that's a core capability that we have in AWS. And I encourage you to think about how you address that yourselves today within your own organization. And so if I may, I'd like to leave you with a call to action. That is that you should consider deploying a security baseline, if you haven't already, that is relevant to the majority of environments that you have within your IT infrastructure. And it should be based across your business profiles and the risk profile of the way you conduct business. You should use capabilities that are now very mature, like automated guardrails and automated compliance controls for auditing everything that you're doing in your IT infrastructure. And finally, I would encourage you to research and plan out your security operations baseline. Build a roadmap, understand where your gaps are, and begin to close those gaps. Now, that is very easy for me to say, but it's actually a huge task for complex IT organizations. And so with that in mind, there are a number of resources that I'd like to make available to you. On the top right is the AWS Incident Response Guide. On the bottom left is the AWS Security Reference Architecture. Whether you use the cloud or not, I would encourage you to look at these and understand where are the gaps in the way you operate today and how can you close those gaps. With that being said, thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll be happy to address any questions that may arise. Thank you so much.
That was great.